Today, we're lucky enough to be joined by Tom Kirk, the co-founder and CEO of Quantified Imaging.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Nice to be here.
Nice to see you again, Thomas. Thomas, would you mind telling everybody how you ended up where you are today and a little bit about your professional background and what exactly it is you're doing now?
So I never set out to end up in dementia. I can't say it's been a culmination of a lifelong ambition for me. But whilst I was at Oxford doing my undergraduate, I was taught by a professor, Michael Chappell. And not only was he a very good teacher, but we got on very well. And then as I advanced through my degree, he offered me the opportunity to do a project with him. When it came to the end of my degree, I wasn't thrilled by the job prospects that were available out there, let's say. And so he said, if you want to do a PhD, I can sort you out. And so I ended up doing a PhD with him. And as the PhD progressed, we got closer and closer to dementia. So at this moment in time, we've now set up this company together. But actually, I've been working on the underlying technology for 10 years now myself in MRI imaging. Michael has been working on technology for 20 years now, leading a research group at Oxford and now Nottingham. So all I can say really is I'm here because it's a really interesting problem to work on. There's no family background to it. There's not, I'm not trying to save humanity or anything, but if we do that, that's great. It is just a really fascinating field to be in, and we're enjoying the science for now.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about quantified imaging and the science behind that and how that came about.
So we've been developing a type of MRI technology called arterial spin labeling, ASL. And ASL is something that you can run on almost all existing hospital MRI scanners out there, whether it's a GE, a Philips, or a Siemens. The FDA and the European Authority, CE, they've already approved sequences, so you can collect these scans on existing hospital scanners. Anyway, the interesting bit is what ASL tells you about the brain. So whereas a normal MRI scan is an image of what is in the brain, static, an ASL MRI scan tells you what is happening. It's a dynamic image, and in particular, we are able to measure blood flow in the brain. And that is really important for looking into any kind of neurodegenerative disease. So the different dementias, we have Alzheimer's, frontotemporal dementia, Parkinson's, these are all subtypes of dementia. One of the ways in which you can diagnose them is looking at the patterns of blood flow that they make on the brain. So we've got some examples we can walk through later, but classically with Alzheimer's disease, we see reduced blood flow at the back of the brain, whereas in frontotemporal dementia, you see the pattern at the front. The reason this is also valuable in clinical work is twofold. So firstly, the current gold standard way that you would diagnose these diseases is using a PET scan. PET scans are enormously expensive. In the US, the going rate for a PET scan is as high as $12,000 per scan. It's hugely expensive. It's radioactive. There's not many of them. In the UK, if you are on the dementia diagnostic pathway in the NHS, there is just a 2% chance that you'll be given a PET scan. It's the Ferrari of diagnosis. It's great, but there is absolutely no way that we can scale it up to give everyone a proper diagnosis. And then as a result, people are shuffled onto traditional MRI imaging, the conventional static MRI. And the problem with that is by the time you get a clear diagnosis from that kind of MRI, it's too late to treat. Unfortunately, the patient is too far gone, the disease is too advanced, there's nothing you can really do about it. So where we fit in with the ASL MRI, we have demonstrated already on some clinical data sets we have access to, we're getting equivalent diagnostic accuracy to PET scans, but it's still on an MRI scanner. So you get the best of both worlds.
Okay, so tell me a little bit about what scanner it can be used on, just for simplicity's sake.
So it's any 3 Tesla. We primarily work with 3 Tesla. These are modern, up-to-date MRI scanners. And it's a GE, a Philips, a Siemens. They all have the compatibility. And with those three scanner manufacturers, you cover, I think, 80–90% of the install base of scanners out there. So it's a very accessible technology. In the UK, there are 19 times more MRI scanners than there are PET scanners. So PET is going to have its role to play in drug development. PET's really important. But in terms of how do we diagnose the population, in the US, there are now 1 million people a year who are getting Alzheimer's disease, many of them undiagnosed. How are you going to do it? MRI is going to be part of that solution. It can't be PET.
Okay, and you're talking to some pretty significant players in the market right now. So there's Weill Cornell. I know that there's the Pacific Neurosciences Institute. Who are you working with right now?
So Cornell and Pacific Neuroscience, they're both examples of early adopter customers. These are, and at the moment they're not paying customers of us. These are research collaborations, but they're both examples of sites who have the in-house expertise and scientific excellence to push the boundaries. So independently of us, both of these sites started using ASL. So Pacific Neuroscience, they started using ASL because it is just so much cheaper and quicker to acquire than PET scans. So that was the sell for them. And then for Cornell, they started using it because they found actually by bringing the ASL scan as their first screen for dementia now, even before blood tests, which are a technology we may come on to later, and blood tests are also going to be part of the whole story for dementia diagnosis. But now at Cornell, they're getting such great results using the MRI scan, the ASL, as just a quick first screen, that they do that even before sending someone off to a blood test. Now, these two sites are examples of organizations where they're willing to get into the science, they're willing to try something new, a little bit experimental. What we don't have at the moment is the majority of the rest of hospitals around the world who don't necessarily have the resources, the ability, the initiative to go and try something unfamiliar. So what quantified imaging will try and do is develop the software so that you can acquire these scans on any scanner, and then we help you make sense of it. And that's the missing link at the moment. When we speak to people all over the space, including both in clinical practice and drug development, one of the common themes that comes up is, I'm really interested in ASL, but when I get the scan back, I don't know how to interpret it. I don't know what I'm looking for. I don't know what the warning signs are. So our software is all about taking these scans and distilling them down into a very simple report. We highlight the key features of concern. And from that, we can give you probability scores for the disease state they're in, where they might be heading next. But it's the helping hand that enables the user to understand what's going on. And this idea of software that helps a radiologist read a scan, this is now really well established in stroke and cancer care. It's a model that has transformed other areas of healthcare. Dementia is the logical next place to go.
But tell me, early diagnosis is an issue. If people are diagnosed early, are the outcomes better?
Absolutely. So there are now 2 drugs in market for Alzheimer's disease specifically, donanemab and lecanemab. And the latest trial results, we are now, as a community, we're investigating moving to a regime of starting treatment very early and potentially even doing a sort of maintenance dosing regime, they call it. So you would be spotting people who are at risk early in life. And then as soon as you see the signs of the pathology developing in the brain, you could put them onto a low but continuous dose of the drug for an extended period of time. And it's similar, for example, to what we see with the anti-obesity drugs, for example. Perhaps that's a model we'll move to, where we just keep you on a low maintenance dose. What we do know from the previous trials that have been conducted is that outcomes were better the earlier you started. And that is entirely consistent with what we know about the disease. At the end of the day, Alzheimer's dementia is a neurodegenerative disease. What that means is, as the disease advances, you are losing brain tissue. And once it's gone, as of yet, we can't grow it back. Technology is not there to replace lost tissue. So you really need to be in a preventative paradigm. And that's why starting early matters so much.
Okay, so I know that you're also doing evaluation of a prototype software with University College London Hospital. What's that? What's going on there?
So that's a slightly different direction of travel. So like all good young enterprises, we've got many irons in the fire because you never know which one's going to come good and which ones you're going to have to pivot on. So with UCL, they already operate ASL they operate it in two contexts. So partly they do it in a neurovascular imaging protocol. So this would be, for example, some stroke patients will be going through that imaging pathway. Also some moya patients, it's a relatively rare disease, but so there's a whole stream of patients that have neurovascular disorders. And then importantly, there is a substantial number of patients where they are unsuitable for, let's say, the currently used alternative imaging techniques to ASL. So I'll rewind a bit. One of the commonly used imaging techniques to measure blood flow in the brain is a technique called DSC, or perfusion MRI. And the brief synopsis is you need to inject the patient with a gadolinium chemical, and that gadolinium spreads through the body and collects in the brain, and that's what the MRI image can pick up. So this is a tracer imaging technique. The problem with this is gadolinium is toxic, and it's now known to accumulate in the brain, so that's not great. You'd rather not do too many of those scans if you can. For patients who are on a neurocancer pathway, they typically end up receiving 10 MRI scans throughout their diagnosis and treatment journey. So you can quickly see that some patients are going to end up getting a very high exposure to gadolinium because of these repeated scans. But also patients who have chronic kidney disease, which is increasingly common disorder that affects the whole population, patients who are pregnant, with a fetus developing in the womb, and finally kids, all of these patient groups are contraindicated for gadolinium. You don't want to be giving them the tracer imaging, the chemical, if you can avoid it because of health risks. So UCL have had a long-standing interest in using ASL because there is no chemical involved, there's no gadolinium, no nothing. And so it means for these patient groups who are unsuitable for the conventional techniques, ASL is a great substitute. You get the same information, but without any chemicals going into the body. So that's the basis of our ongoing work with UCL.
Thank you for that. Does gadolinium just break down in the body, or is it excreted through urine?
So for the most part, it's excreted through urine, which is why kidney function is so important. If you've got well-functioning kidneys, then most of the gadolinium will be cleared. However, for all people, some gadolinium is known to accumulate in the brain. The bigger societal issue, which is something that is increasingly being talked about at conference, is there is now measurable levels of gadolinium in the water table. Mm-hmm. You could go and sample, a river down the back of your garden or go to a well, and all over the developed world, in the last 30, 40 years, since the increasing use of these imaging techniques, we can now measure increasing concentration of gadolinium everywhere. So in the long term, there's a strong argument that we'll need to move away from the technique entirely. It could be leaded petrol. We'll wonder one day why we ever did it.
Okay. Now, the solution is scalable. I think that's very important. Tell me about the scalability of this particular solution, of both solutions, I should suggest.
So MRI is, fundamentally, it is a very widely available imaging technique. Currently, if you are on a dementia diagnostic pathway, 70% of patients across the rich world will get an MRI scan as part of their diagnostic journey. So what we are proposing isn't a huge change to workflow, which is really important. as we know in healthcare, changing workflows is always a difficult thing to do. But people are going to be getting an MRI scan anyway. So that's very important. The problem is the way that we currently use MRI is we use it to rule out other diseases. So if you're presenting with memory concerns, you will get an MRI scan to check that there's no tumor, you're not suffering some kind of stroke. And once they've eliminated those other explanations, then you go on to more specialized dementia testing. What we propose to do is, rather than having this MRI rule out other things, and then you go forwards to a PET where you can confirm dementia, we could do it all in the same session. You'd be replacing 2 scans into just 1 scan session. So it's for that reason we think it is a very scalable solution and familiar.
Okay, so just to summarize, the QI-ASL MRI is about $600 per scan. There's about 38 scanners per million citizens in the rich world. It takes about 20 minutes per scan and it's not radioactive, where on the other side of a PET, you've got it's about $3,000 to $4,000 per scan. It's 6 times fewer scanners in the world per million citizens, 60 minutes per scan or longer generally, and it's also radioactive.
Yeah.
Okay.
The PET is pretty, like I say, the Ferrari of
Yes.
techniques. It can't be scaled.
Okay, and we have the same accuracy and the same prognosis.
Yeah, so the main data set we work with is a data set called ADNI. This is used by researchers all over the world. But yeah, our results, 500 clinical subjects, we have equivalent diagnostic and prognostic accuracy to the PET scan using our MRI.
Okay, could you tell me something about Professor Michael Chappell, the other co-founder, please?
Yeah, so Michael is Deputy Head of Medicine at the University of Nottingham. And more importantly, he is the world leader on ASL MRI image analysis. So he's been working on this technology for 20 years. He was very young when he was made a professor at Oxford, which is where this whole project started up. And he led a research group at Oxford that both myself and a few other members of the company have come through. So this company, not completely, but in large part, this is people who have come through the research group. We all know each other. We've been working together for at least 6 years now amongst the whole team. And whilst we were in the university, we developed this piece of software called Basil. Basil is the world's leading research software for ASL MRI. So, for example, some listeners may have heard about the UK Biobank. It's an amazing study, a really forward-thinking piece of work by the UK. And ASL is being collected in Biobank. The patients are getting ASL scans. And Basil is the software that is being used to process those scans. In the US, there's another similar study, not quite as large, but more in depth. It's called the Human Connectome Project. They're mapping what the brain looks like over the entire lifespan. I think the youngest subject is 8 years old and the oldest is about 100. I've been working on this data myself a lot. It is absolutely beautiful data. Never before have we had such a rich data set that shows us how the brain evolves over life. And again, ASL was collected, Basil was used for that. So the foundation of this company is we have spent 20 years solving all the difficult problems in research, developing a solution that enables researchers all over the world to make ASL sing as a technology. And now we're ready to push that clinical. And Michael's scientific leadership is the core of that. He's been doing this since day one.
He is a very impressive person. You've also got a fabulous team of people, which are, I think, world standard. You've got the lovely Armin, you've got Dr. Logan, you've got Dr. Martin Craig, Odelle, you've got, the fabulous Dr. Kate McLeay, who I think is a very talented individual. So you've really got a wonderful group of people behind you.
Yeah, we're very pleased to poach Armin. So Armin's our CTO.
Yes.
We poached him from industry. He spent some years at Vodafone and then at Visa as a machine learning engineer. And without putting words into his mouth too strongly, he was very happy to come over to QI because he wanted to do something that feels more important, let's say. So we were really pleased to get him. And then along with Odelle, who we got straight out of Imperial, where she'd been doing a master's in robotics.
Yeah.
Two unconventional hires because they've got no background in imaging whatsoever. And they've now been with us for 1 year, and they've both been great because it is a cliche, but you get new eyes on an old problem and you get new solutions.
Yes.
And that's undoubtedly the case with them. Logan and Martin have both been through the research groups. I've been working with them for years, and safe pair of hands, really, really talented individuals. Logan in particular is now our go-to clinical guy, and Martin does all the difficult software maintenance and development.
And you've got a very exciting board of people. I think you've got Hannah Brees, you've got Ben Maguire, you've got a lot of other interesting people.
Yes. Well, Ben, introduce to yourself, but we'll start with Paul, who's the most recent addition. Yep. So Paul is CEO of Sidar Medical. They are an interventional radiology company who are expanding in the US at the moment. So interventional radiology is imaging that's used in surgery to guide surgery. I think a lot of the work is cardiac, so it's always seen as the most sexy of radiology disciplines because of I guess it makes for really good TV. It's very dramatic in the operating theatre.
Yes.
Anyway, the point being that they're expanding very quickly in the US at the moment, and so Paul, through that experience, he is dealing with many of the scale-up challenges that all radiology companies face. The reality of healthcare as a business, it is difficult to scale things. Every hospital has a slightly different way of working. So the reason we wanted Paul to join our board is because we will be facing those challenges in the near future. And hopefully, he's been there, he's done it, he'll be able to point us the way. And then with Ben, his time as head of IP at Virgin Group, lots of licensing and partnership agreements. Primarily, Quantified Imaging is going to be a B2B company. We will not be going out and scanning patients directly. We won't be scanning consumers. So partnerships and licensing is going to be the way in which we get to market. And that's where Ben's experience is going to be really useful for us.
Absolutely. So in a perfect world, what would the next couple of years look like for the company?
So currently we are doing a fundraising, and we're seeking to raise 1.5 million. That is going to get us our first FDA approval. Yeah. And then we will be launching that first product, MVP, in the US middle of next year. So July 2026 is our target launch date. I hope we'll be signing up our first clinical site towards the end of this year on a research evaluation basis, but already actually at this point, I think we've got 3 or 4 leads. So I wouldn't be surprised if one of them is going to come through even earlier. Also, really recently breaking news, actually, we are about to sign our first commercial agreement to join a clinical trial. So we will be providing our imaging technology into a commercial clinical trial. And that is a really important way for us to firstly generate a bit of revenue before we have regulatory clearance. And secondly, being involved in drug development, being close to that world, enables you to spot future opportunities. It's a great way to build traction. It's a great way to build evidence. And if you can spot the next emerging thing, it can be a very valuable place to be.
Could you illustrate some of the quantified neurodegeneration, please?
Absolutely. So I've got 2 case reports I can show you. So the first of which is an Alzheimer's disease patient. So this is a 5-year longitudinal monitoring case. This patient joined one of the research studies called ADNI, and they were scanned every year for 5 years. And using other techniques, including blood tests and PET scans, etc., we know what their trajectory is. We know what their diagnosis at each moment in time was, but they also collected the ASL MRI. So for us, the question is, using the ASL MRI, can we get what we know to be the right answer? Can we get the ground truth answer from the data? So up top, this is the ASL image. This is a scan showing where blood is flowing in the brain. The red areas are showing the most blood flow. The whole point about ASL MRI is, although although it's visually simple to see where the blood is in the brain, the thing that makes ASL MRI difficult for people to read is there's often missing context. So we can see in this patient, they have so much blood in this part of their brain, but what's missing is an idea of, is that a lot of blood? Is that not enough blood? What's normal? If you think about the way that diagnosis often works, you're looking at someone's image and you're trying to work out if that's abnormal. How far away are they from where I expect them to be? And the bigger that difference is, the more clearly you have a signal that something is wrong. With ASL MRI, that's the bit that's missing. At the moment, radiologists, when they look at a scan, they don't really have confidence about what normal is for that patient. And that's what all of our technology helps answer. I'll walk you through how it works here. So this is the clever bit. We've taken the same scan, but we've worked out, we have a clever model that can predict what normal would be for this patient as a function of their age, their sex, and some other demographic factors, including BMI. Genotyping is something we could bring in the future. So now we've developed a personalized prediction of what healthy would be for this patient, and then we can compare that to their actual scan, and then finally we can work out the difference. So in this case, blue corresponds to the patient is showing less blood flow than we would expect for someone of their age, sex, etc. And here on this brain, we're seeing they have this global reduction in blood flow. Everything is blue. Some areas are more blue than others. And then here's the bit that's such a nice result for us. When I showed this to our collaborator at Cornell, she was thrilled. She said it was the nicest thing she'd seen all week, actually. So we have the 5 years that they were scanned along the top here. So we have 2017 all the way down to 2022. And we know that this patient in the final 2 years, they had entered what's called mild cognitive impairment, MCI, which is the early dementia stage. And we can see our heat map, where again, blue corresponds to negative. They are below where we expect them to be. We can really clearly see in the final 2 years, 2021, 22, they tipped over. They started degenerating faster than we would expect. So in this case, the ASL MRI captured their trajectory from being normal, no concern, and suddenly in the final 2 years, they have tipped over the edge. They are now of concern. And this is where you would want to come in with treatment. This MCI patient is at the perfect stage for treatment. The other example we've got, this is a much younger patient, actually, just 48 years old, was involved in a car accident, and they were being scanned by a collaborator in the US. And this is a traumatic brain injury case. Now, TBI, traumatic brain injury, is not something we've discussed thus far in the call, but it is an absolutely enormous problem. It is the leading cause of death or disability in the US for people under the age of 45 years old. And in the US, there are about 400,000 serious TBI cases per year across the whole country. And that compares to serious brain tumor cases of 100,000 a year. So TBI is a much larger problem than, say, brain cancer. Anyway, this is a really nice case because it shows the value add of our technology. If you were just looking at this top scan, the ASL MRI, it would be hard to see that there's anything of concern here. I'll ask you, Stephen, actually, what do you think? What do you make of this? Does it look like the activity is roughly the same all over the brain?
It does to me, yes, it does.
Then we've applied the same technology here. So we've predicted what we think healthy would look like for this patient, and then we can calculate how far, what the differences are for this patient compared to healthy. And now we really clearly see an asymmetry, actually. So on the right, well, okay, this is confusing. It's on the left side of the brain as it's shown on screen, but you see there's an L here. That's because radiologists look at all images back to front. But anyway, we can see on one half of the brain, everything is colored blue, and in particular, this region is a darker blue than the others. And so this was actually the focal point of the injury. This patient was in a car accident, their head impacted on this side, which is why we have this dark blue region concentrated here. But the damage from that impact has actually diffused, and most of their frontal lobe is showing reduced perfusion. So there's an asymmetry, and that is the classic hallmark of a TBI. You often see asymmetry, but it's something that you can't see to the naked eye. So it's a really compelling value add in that we are able to spot this subtle pattern that is important for patient management.
That's superb. Thank you very much for that. I had no idea. And I wanted to thank you very much for your time today and everything you've done. And I think it's absolutely amazing.
But you've done so much to support us, and you made all the introductions, so we wouldn't be here. Have a nice day. Take care.
See you, mate. Bye-bye.